What does systematic destruction sound like? For Billie Holiday, it lived in every note of her voice, each one carrying the pressure of a world determined to break her. Born as Eleanora Fagan, abandoned by her father and forced into adult realities before she turned 12, she would become Lady Day, turning unimaginable trauma into music that exposed America's hidden brutality. Her story isn't just about a legendary voice lost too soon. It's about how racism, abuse, and relentless persecution closed in around a woman who refused to stop singing. Even when federal agents hounded her for years and ultimately handcuffed her to a hospital bed as she was dying, they couldn't erase what she'd already recorded. This is the story of Billie Holiday, how beauty rose from ashes, and how the voice they tried to silence ended up outliving everyone who tried to destroy her. Eleanora Fagan entered the world on April 7, 1915, already marked for struggle. Her teenage mother, Sadie, barely managed to keep them afloat in Philadelphia, while her father, Clarence, abandoned them early, leaving behind only his last name, Holiday, which Billie would later claim as Armour. By age 9, truancy had landed her in Baltimore's House of the Good Shepherd, a Catholic reform school where discipline meant terror. The nuns once locked her overnight in a room with a dead body. For years afterward, she would wake screaming from nightmares, that corpse still haunting her sleep. The reform school was supposed to save her. Instead, it taught her that institutions designed for protection often delivered the opposite. After her release, 11-year-old Eleanora faced worse. On Christmas Eve 1926, a neighbor attempted to assault her. When she reported it, the authorities' solution was sending her back to the same reform school, punishing the victim while calling it safety. She emerged a few months later, not yet 12, into a world that had already shown her its cruelest face. Survival meant growing up fast in Baltimore. She ran errands in a local brothel where the phonograph played constantly. Louis Armstrong's trumpet and Bessie Smith's voice filled those rooms, teaching her that pain could become something else, something beautiful. When her mother moved to Harlem, 13-year-old Billie followed, but their new landlady also ran a brothel. Mother and daughter both became entangled in that world, doing what they had to for rent and food. The Vice Squad didn't distinguish between victim and criminal. In her mid-teens, Billie and her mother were swept up in a brothel raid in Harlem and arrested on solicitation charges. Not yet 15, she found herself behind bars, another institution, another betrayal. These early years created the emotional reservoir she would draw from for the rest of her life. Later she'd say, nobody sang the word hunger or love the way she did because she'd lived at the sharp edge of both. By 1929, she had begun singing in Harlem, nightclubs, borrowing Billie from movie star Billy Dove, and finally claiming Holiday from the father who never claimed her. The stage name was both tribute and defiance, taking what was denied and making it hers. Those early audiences heard something different in the teenage girl's voice, something that went beyond technique. She sang like someone who had already lived a full life, because in many ways, she had. The Great Depression had gripped America by the time Billie Holiday began performing regularly in Harlem's clubs. While breadlines grew longer and hope grew shorter, she discovered that her voice could earn more in one night than her mother made in a week. John Hammond, the legendary talent scout, first heard her in 1933 at a small Harlem club and was stunned by the way she transformed a simple, popular tune into something haunted and lived in. What he heard went beyond singing. It felt like emotional archaeology, excavating feelings most people tried to bury. Hammond arranged her first recording session that same year with Benny Goodman. The songs were lighthearted, Your Mother's Son-in-Law, and Riffin' the Scotch. But Holiday's delivery added unexpected depth. She bent notes like Armstrong bent his trumpet lines, lagging behind the beat just enough to create tension, arriving at the melody's resolution exactly when the ear needed it most. This technique, unconsciously developed, would influence generations of singers, including Frank Sinatra, who openly credited her as his phrasing teacher. Success came quickly, but never easily. By the mid-1930s, Holiday was recording regularly with Teddy Wilson's orchestra, creating the sides that would become jazz standards. What a Little Moonlight Can Do showcased her ability to transform a bouncy tune into something knowing and wise. Miss Brown to You revealed her gift for finding the adult implications in seemingly innocent lyrics. Each recording session added to her reputation as someone who could make any song sound like autobiography. Yet even as her star rose, the boundaries were clear. She could record with white musicians in the studio, but performing with them publicly was another matter. Black singers entertaining white audiences was acceptable. Black singers sharing equal billing with white performers was not. The Cotton Club, Harlem's most famous venue, welcomed white patrons to watch black entertainers, but barred black customers from entering as guests. Holiday navigated this twisted logic daily, her growing fame unable to override her skin color. The theatrical side of her performances began developing during these years. She would close her eyes during particularly emotional passages, not as affectation, but from genuine feeling. The gardenia she wore in her hair became her signature, a touch of beauty she could control in a world that controlled so much else. Audiences began calling her Lady Day, a nickname given by saxophonist Lester Young, who became one of her few trusted friends in an industry full of exploitation. Her voice was becoming legendary, but it was a voice shaped by everything she had survived. Critics would later write about her limited range, missing the point entirely. Holiday didn't need 3 octaves when she could break hearts with 3 notes. She proved that emotional truth mattered more than technical perfection, that living the lyrics was more important than merely singing them. In 1938, Billie Holiday shattered a barrier that many thought unbreakable. Artie Shaw, the white clarinetist whose orchestra rivaled Benny Goodman's in popularity, hired her as his band's featured vocalist. She became the first black woman to tour the segregated South with an all-white orchestra, a move that generated headlines and hatred in equal measure. Shaw himself was conflicted, progressive enough to hire her, but unprepared for the backlash that followed. The tour exposed Holiday to degradation that fame should have prevented, but instead amplified. In Kentucky, when she took the stage, a voice from the audience cut through the applause. "Wench." The words hung in the air like the strange fruit she would soon sing about. Shaw's musicians surrounded her, escorting her off stage before violence erupted. This became the pattern: perform, endure, retreat, repeat. Hotels that welcomed the band barred Holiday at the door. While her white colleagues relaxed in comfortable rooms, she slept on the tour bus, using gas station restrooms when they'd allow her, finding bushes when they wouldn't. Restaurant after restaurant turned her away, forcing band members to bring her food like she was quarantined. The Lincoln Hotel in New York, where the band had a residency, insisted she use the service elevator. Management banned her from the bar and dining room where the rest of the orchestra unwound between sets. These daily humiliations accumulated like compound interest on a debt she never incurred. The breaking point came when she learned about her father. Clarence Holiday, the man whose name she had claimed but who had never claimed her, was touring with Don Redman's orchestra when he developed a respiratory infection. Hospital after hospital in Texas turned him away. They didn't treat black patients. By the time he found a facility that would admit him, pneumonia had set in. He died at 39, killed not by disease, but by denial of care. The news reached Billie while she was still touring with Shaw. She stood on stage that night, singing to people who looked like those who had let her father die. The gardenia in her hair, usually a symbol of beauty and defiance, felt like a funeral flower. By the end of 1938, she left Shaw's orchestra. Years later, Shaw admitted he should have done more, fought harder, but apologies couldn't resurrect the dead or heal the wounds. This period crystallized something fundamental in Holiday's consciousness. Success in white spaces came at a price that compounded daily. Integration meant accepting disintegration, of dignity, of health, of family. Yet she had also proven something important, that talent could force open doors, even if those doors led to rooms where she wasn't welcome to sit down. The experience prepared her for what came next, when she would stop asking for acceptance and start demanding recognition. The poem arrived at Café Society in 1939 like a message in a bottle washing up on a revolutionary shore. Abel Mirapol, a Jewish schoolteacher writing under the name Lewis Allen, had penned "Strange Fruit" after seeing a photograph of a lynching. The verses were stark, violent, beautiful in their horror, southern trees bearing bodies instead of magnolias, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Barney Josephson, who ran Café Society as New York's first integrated nightclub, knew immediately who should sing it. Holiday was terrified when she first read the lyrics. She understood the danger in those words, the target they would paint on her back. But she also thought of her father, dead from medical racism, and found her courage. She would sing it for him, for all of them. The preparation was meticulous. She insisted on specific conditions. When she performed "Strange Fruit," the waiters would stop serving, the room would go dark except for a single spotlight on her face, and there would be no encore. The song would close her set, leaving audiences to sit with their discomfort. Opening night, the club fell silent as Holiday began. Her voice emerged soft but unwavering, describing pastoral southern scenes before revealing the horrific truth. Some patrons wept, others walked out in disgust, not at the lynchings, but at being forced to acknowledge them. A few tried to request it like any other song, only to be told this was different. This was testimony. Columbia Records, her label, refused to record it. John Hammond himself, who had discovered her, called it too political, wrong for her image. Holiday didn't back down. She found Commodore Records, a small label willing to take the risk. The recording session was unlike any other. She needed multiple takes, not from technical failure, but from emotional overwhelm. When they finally captured it, the engineer said the temperature in the room had dropped, like they'd summoned ghosts. Which in a way, they had. Despite almost no radio play and informal resistance in many places, "Strange Fruit" became one of her most successful records, with some accounts saying it ultimately sold around 1 million copies. People bought it quietly and played it at home, like contraband that could change minds. Time magazine mentioned Holiday for the first time because of the song. When some club owners tried to forbid it, she had clauses added to certain contracts to protect her right to perform it. This was her weapon and shield. The song transformed Holiday from entertainer to artist activist. She performed it for 20 years, never getting comfortable with its weight. Each performance was a risk, a dare, a memorial service. She was making America look at what it preferred to ignore, using her voice as both mirror and magnifying glass. The federal government noticed. Harry Anslinger, head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, added her to his list of targets. A black woman singing about lynching to white audiences was, in his view, forgetting her place. He would spend the next 20 years trying to remind her of it. Love arrived in Billie Holiday's life the way rain falls in the desert, suddenly, intensely, and never quite enough to sustain what it promises to nourish. In 1941, at 26, she married Jimmy Monroe, a man whose charm concealed his true nature. Monroe moved in smooth circles, always had money though never seemed to work, and introduced Holiday to something that would define the rest of her life. And later, its derivative. She was already drinking heavily by then, using alcohol to quiet the noise in her head, to sleep despite the memories. The first time felt like finally exhaling after holding her breath for 26 years. Here was something that made the pain negotiate, that turned trauma into distant thunder instead of immediate lightning. That it also created a new kind of prison wouldn't become clear until the bars were already in place. The pattern Holiday established with Monroe would repeat with devastating consistency. After their divorce in 1947, she took up with Joe Guy, a trumpeter in her band who was also her supplier. Love and addiction intertwined like DNA strands. Then came John Levy, who managed her career and her habits simultaneously. He would beat her before performances, leaving bruises she covered with makeup and long gloves. Friends who visited her dressing room pretended not to notice the evidence, complicit in their silence. During this chaos, Holiday created some of her most enduring music. God Bless the Child emerged from a fight with her mother, who had taken money from Billie but refused to lend her any when she needed it. Holiday stormed out, saying that God blesses the child that's got his own, and that hurt became a standard that spoke to anyone who'd ever been denied help by people they trusted. She recorded Lover Man in 1944 during a period of heavy drinking and abuse, and the longing in the lyric felt uncomfortably close to her real life. The record captures a voice that sounds both fragile and determined at once. You can hear her heart breaking in real time, her desperate need for someone, anyone, to ease the kind of loneliness that chemicals couldn't quite reach. Her final marriage was to Louis McKay in 1957, a mob enforcer who saw her as an investment rather than a person. He controlled her bookings, her money, her movements. Even as her health failed, he was making plans for Billie Holiday Vocal Studios, franchising her name like a restaurant chain. When she died, they were estranged, but he still positioned himself to inherit what little she had left. The tragedy wasn't just that Holiday chose poorly. It was that she chose from a limited menu. The men drawn to her saw vulnerability as opportunity. Those who might have loved her properly were scared away by her fame, her habits, her damage. She craved what she'd never had: stability, safety, someone who saw her as more than Lady Day. Instead, she found men who confirmed what she'd learned in childhood, that love was something you paid for, one way or another, and the price was always too high. Harry Anslinger ran the Federal Bureau of Narcotics like a moral crusade, and Billie Holiday became one of his favorite targets. A racist who wrote that jazz was satanic and that made black people forget their place, he saw Holiday as the embodiment of everything he wanted to crush. A black woman, famous, outspoken, and associated with a song that forced audiences to look at lynching. By the time Strange Fruit was provoking outrage and admiration in equal measure, she was already on his radar. In his world, someone like Billie Holiday needed to be controlled or removed. The campaign, as Holiday later told it, intensified after she was warned not to sing the song in certain venues and refused. Agents followed her constantly, sitting in clubs, taking notes, waiting. They pressured venue owners, threatening licenses if they continued booking her. They offered dealers reduced sentences for setting her up. They turned friends into informants, lovers into collaborators. Later accounts say that even Louis McKay, her own husband, passed information to agents when it suited him, trading her safety for his own protection. On May 16, 1947, they struck. Agents raided her New York apartment, claiming to find a small amount of Holiday, in a moment of defiance that would have been comedic if it weren't so tragic, stripped naked when they tried to search her. The case was titled The United States of America versus Billie Holiday, a name that captured exactly how she felt, like the entire weight of the country was against her. Without money for a good lawyer, shaking from withdrawal, she pleaded guilty, hoping for mercy. The judge sentenced her to a year and a day in federal prison. She served about 8 months in Alderson, West Virginia. Doing prison farm work she later compared to being sent back to the fields, often too sick to meet the demands. Upon release in March 1948, she discovered the government's true punishment. New York City had revoked her cabaret card, meaning she couldn't perform anywhere that served alcohol. For a jazz singer, this was professional death. She attempted a comeback at Carnegie Hall, selling out all 2,700 seats, proving the public still wanted her. But concert halls paid less than clubs, and she needed money for lawyers, for doctors, for the substances that kept withdrawal at bay. Anslinger's agents never stopped watching. In 1949, they planted her San Francisco hotel room. Though those charges didn't stick, the message was clear: they could get her anywhere, anytime. The persecution reached its cruelest point in June 1959. Holiday was dying, her liver destroyed by years of alcohol, her heart failing from the accumulation of damage. She was hospitalized, weighing less than 70 pounds. Even then, Anslinger wouldn't relent. Agents claimed to find heroin in her hospital room, likely planted, and arrested her in her bed. They handcuffed her to the metal frame. took mugshots of her in her hospital gown, posted guards at her door. Visitors needed permits. Gifts were confiscated. When doctors began giving her methadone to ease her suffering, she started improving. The agents intervened, forcing the hospital to stop treatment. Without the methadone, she deteriorated rapidly. On July 17, 1959, Billie Holiday died under police guard. The officers removed only hours before her last breath. She had 70 cents in the bank. The government had won, but their victory was Pyrrhic. They had silenced her voice, but not her songs. 3,000 mourners lined up outside St. Paul the Apostle Church on July 21, 1959. Some reports say 10,000. They came to pay respects to a woman the New York Times dismissed in a tiny obituary, noting only that her voice had been husked by tragedy. Inside, Reverend Eugene Callender delivered a eulogy that was part memorial, part indictment. This young lady was gifted by her creator with tremendous talent. She should have lived to be at least 80 years old. The immediate aftermath of Holiday's death was as contentious as her life. Louis McKay, the husband who had controlled and exploited her, handled her burial arrangements and estate, profiting even from her funeral. She was buried in St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Bronx, in a grave paid for by a friend because she had died essentially penniless, with barely more than loose change to her name. As for the officials who had spent years pursuing her, there was no apology, no reconsideration, only the quiet certainty that their case against Billie Holiday was closed. But death did what life couldn't. It freed her from persecution and allowed her art to speak without interference. In the 1960s, as the civil rights movement gained momentum, Strange Fruit became an anthem again. Young activists discovered that a woman had been singing about racial violence 20 years before Montgomery, before Little Rock, before the March on Washington. The song that had cost her so much became part of the soundtrack of change. The recognitions came slowly, then in a flood. The Grammy Hall of Fame inducted multiple recordings. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame acknowledged her as an early influence, recognizing that modern music was impossible without her contributions. Rolling Stone ranked her among the greatest singers of all time. Strange Fruit was added to the National Recording Registry, deemed culturally significant enough to preserve forever. Time magazine, which had barely noticed her while alive, called the song one of the most important of the 20th century. Frank Sinatra never stopped crediting her with teaching him how to phrase a song. Tony Bennett called her the most influential singer of her generation. Modern artists from Amy Winehouse to Beyoncé traced their emotional authenticity back to Holiday's willingness to expose her wounds through music. She had created a template for turning personal pain into universal art, for making individual suffering speak to collective experience. The dramatic intensity she brought to performance became the standard all jazz singers were measured against. Her approach, treating each song as autobiography, finding the emotional truth beneath surface lyrics, revolutionized popular singing. Before Holiday, singers were entertainers. After her, they could be artists. She proved that technical perfection mattered less than emotional honesty, that a crack in the voice could communicate more than perfect pitch. Hollywood finally attempted to tell her story properly. Lady Sings the Blues in 1972 brought her to a new generation, though it softened many edges. The United States versus Billie Holiday in 2021 finally centered the government persecution, showing how systematically she was destroyed for refusing to be silent. Each retelling introduced her to audiences who discovered that behind every song was a woman who had paid for her art with her life. Billie Holiday died believing she had lost. The government had won, the racism had won. She couldn't have imagined that schoolchildren would one day study Strange Fruit as a masterpiece of protest art, or that her fractured, behind-the-beat phrasing would, "I help define modern singing." The woman who died with 70 cents to her name became priceless to American culture. Her story forces us to sit with uncomfortable questions about art and suffering. Did the pain make the art possible, or did the art make the pain bearable? Would we have Holiday's most devastating recordings without the trauma that shaped her? There's no neat answer, only the recognition that in her life, beauty and brutality were permanently intertwined, and she almost never knew success without surveillance, love without exploitation, or relief without addiction. Yet Holiday's real victory isn't in plaques, tributes, or awards. It's in the permanence of her voice. Every time someone plays God Bless the Child or Strange Fruit, she wins again. Every singer who chooses emotional truth over technical perfection is, in some way, following her lead. The agents who handcuffed her to a hospital bed are now obscure names in the record. The men who abused and exploited her survive mostly as supporting villains in her story. Billie Holiday's voice remains, carrying all her pain and all her power, turning suffering into something that still stops people in their tracks. She once said, "If I'm going to sing like someone else, then I don't need to sing at all." That refusal to become anything but herself, despite every attempt to reshape or silence her, is her greatest legacy. In a world that told her she was wrong to be black, wrong to be poor, wrong to sing what she sang the way she sang it, she insisted on being exactly who she was. That insistence cost her almost everything, and gave us almost everything. The gardenia in her hair was never just decoration. It was a quiet declaration that grace could exist alongside degradation. They took her freedom, her health, and finally her life, but they couldn't take her voice. Today, when we listen to Billie Holiday, we hear survival turned into art, oppression turned into expression, silence turned into song. She lost her life, but in the long run, she won her war. Her voice goes on, strange and beautiful as the fruit she sang about, teaching each new generation that pain can become power when you refuse to be silent.